So, welcome everyone to tonight's Active Travel Cafe. We're going to start with our usual crowdsourced news update, and we'll aim to finish that by around 5:20. And then following that, we're really pleased to have Zsolt Schuller, who's the Cyclist Welcome Manager at the National Trust. And they are on a mission to enhance cycling infrastructure and connectivity to all National Trust properties. And that's something that we're always interested to hear more about rural cycling, and many trust properties are in rural places, but obviously some of them are in urban places too. So before we hear from Zsolt though, does anyone have anything that they'd like to share this week? It can be something that you'd like to talk about that's happening nationally, or it can be local news or a question we have a lot of expertise here. So if you kind of have a question about something that's happening in your area, you're welcome to pose that as well. David Cox.
Oh, hi. Birmingham's moving backwards once again, having had 12 years of a so-called cycling revolution. But the latest, we've still not got a walking and cycling commissioner. It's now 6 months nearly since the new mayor was elected. We've not seen any sign of one, though he says he's going to do it. But the other disappointing thing at the moment, those of you who know Birmingham know there's quite a large pedestrianised area in the centre. It's been there for years, and cyclists have been more or less tolerated to ride through it. You can't. The centre becomes totally impenetrable on the bike if you can't. And the community safety people, without any consideration about transport issues, have now been proposing a public space protection order. I know this happens elsewhere in the country, just as one example, isn't it? And it's a reaction to food couriers contracted to major corporations riding modified bikes and going too fast. But the solution is to ban all bikes at the moment. It's going to go to the overview and scrutiny committee. It's been called in, so it hasn't happened yet. But very little has been done to help cyclists cross Birmingham. I mean, it's a sort of guerrilla activity, and it has been in the 50 years I've cycled across Birmingham. You have to keep dodging and weaving, partly because of building work recently and the priority given to the metro. So I just thought people would like to know that. People have experience of fighting public space protection orders, then I'd be interested to hear about it, perhaps in the chat. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I spotted that as well. It's quite depressing. I'm sure lots and lots of people will be kind of as frustrated on your behalf. Ruth.
Well, some positive news here as long as it happens. Camden are consulting on cycle lanes on Shaftesbury Avenue. And Shaftesbury Avenue, if any of you ever visit London or live in London, is really horrific and full of noisy, dirty, filthy traffic. And Camden really are leading the way in lots and lots of schemes, which are very exciting. So that's really positive, which is amazing. The slightly negative I have is that in Chiswick, which is also doing brilliantly on cycle lanes, they are now saying they can't sweep or de-weed certain bits of cycle lane because it's not in the diary to be done and they don't have enough money. And it is one of the things that I've banged on about for years, and Laura Laker banged on, fortunately, to Lou Haig, that maintenance has to be paid for to maintain cycle routes so we don't rely on volunteers, sustrums, all those kind of things. So one positive, one not quite so positive. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Always good to have a positive. Tim.
Just an invite to David, actually. Leicester are hosting a visit by some Brummies on Saturday the 26th to look at some infrastructure and to talk about some of the issues that you've been having, but it's from the Safe Streets group. There is a lot of pushback in the city at the moment about the same issue of cycle couriers. My thought is that it's the illegal bike modifications that's the issue, because that's how you get up to speed. Old people like me on bikes that can just about move should be allowed to go through. The other thing is, of course, scooters, e-scooters at speed. We had a little micro-mobility conference last week, I think, with some evidence from around the world at that. So I'll find the slides and I can share them in the chat or something like that. But you're very welcome, David, anytime.
Thank you, Tim. And Matthew.
Hi everyone. I've recently been doing some work with a member of our cycling campaign who uses an adapted recumbent trike. She has disability, but very keen to get about sustainably. I shot a short video of like a little cycle safari around town, highlighting the barriers to disabled access to our cycle network. So I flagged that to our disability officer. Highways have replied saying these are all legacy issues that predate the Equalities Act, probably even the DDA. They don't put that kind of thing anymore. But then he goes on, actually, we could probably do with a written endorsed access control policy. He comments that they're under pressure from the police and communities to stop off-road bikes. But as we know, 3 High Court judges found that that's not a reason to discriminate against disabled cyclists. So good that they're engaging, good that they don't put that in anymore. I have got a few single points changed over the years, but I would just to call out, if anyone has a really good access to cycle networks policy that is inclusive, particularly for people in what you call designs, I think they're called design cycles, aren't they? A certain width and length. And the turning circle is really the barrier as well as the width. I would really like, just if you know one, send me an email or drop me a link, and I'd be very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And yeah, hopefully somebody can help with that. Cameron.
Hiya, yeah. Been quite a good morning here in Buxton. I'm a member of Buxton Town Team, which is a community interest company, a volunteer organisation. And every year we have a sustainable travel conference, quite a small gathering, but this year it was fairly sizable and had some interesting speakers at it. So we heard from Peak District National Park Transport Policy Planner about their walking and wheeling plan, which has active travel funding, but they've got to use it within a year. Work's progressing on that. So they were meeting with landowners yesterday. They met with Active Travel England yesterday for site visits. They've got a stakeholder meeting tomorrow. They also said there's a local plan consultation for the Peak District National Park that's running between the 7th and 29th of November for anybody who's interested in contributing to that. We heard from Derbyshire County Council about the White Peak Loop and Buxton Walk and Ride routes. So this is a network, I should say. So this is 54-mile circular route linking Matlock, Bakewell and Buxton, for those who don't know. But there's missing links through Buxton. Some other missing links as well, but the one I'm concerned about is through Buxton. And that link forms part of the Buxton network as well. Preliminary designs underway, planning and consultation in 2025. There's some public realm improvement possibly going on in the centre. And we also heard from Transport for Greater Manchester, the excellent talk of walking and cycling infrastructure team lead Dominic Smith joined us. He lives in Buxton. Went through various issues that they identified on the B network, showed some examples in Buxton, went through the solutions, continuous footways, non-prescribed zebras, cyclops and so on, and introduced us to the Transport for Greater Manchester and Active Travel England crossing selection tool. And then just finally, we've got our own project underway, which is a very light rail vehicle. It's called Revolution VLR, very light rail vehicle. And we are we're trying to do a strategic outline business case at the moment. So we're doing the financial viability study. But that's also that links from Buxton, or that would link from Buxton to the start of the Monsell Trail. So that's good for kind of level access to the trail. If we can get it to go ahead and raise the money and so on. That's it.
Oh, thank you. That was really great to hear. I hope lots of positive things come of that, and some of those things happen quickly. Yeah, well, we live in hope. Does anyone else have anything to share before we move on to the speaker section for tonight? No, great. Oh, Adam, you got something?
just a quick.
Oh, feedback.
Yeah, well, just a quick one, which is I noticed that Scotland have decided to revisit or do a public consultation on their speed limits. I'm assuming, once Wales starts this, and with the national road safety strategy that's just been launched, or the phase 1 of that, which has been launched in England, we will get into hopefully a conversation in England rather than just in Wales and Scotland. But I don't know if there's any sort of movement anybody is aware of anything other than the national road safety strategy and the sort of initial conversations around that. That's it's more of a question than anything else.
Thanks, Adam. And Danny has a hand up. Do you have something in response to that, Danny, or is it something else?
Just wanted to say that we got some counts of Magdalen Bridge in Oxford, and the busiest 2 days last week, we had 11,000 cycle movements a day. So that's sort of good bit of cheery news.
All those students at the start of term, or the enthusiasm drops off. And H, you got something that you want to share?
Yeah, I was going to catch up with David Cox. One thing, the 5-year-old killed 2 years ago by a food delivery operative, and they were delivering for a company called Food Hub UK, who have basically absolved themselves and walked away from any liability, whereas they are the principal in charge of the operation. We could actually deal with the food delivery riders if we actually license them. And there are a lot of people campaigning for both food delivery riders, food and online delivery drivers to be regulated because they are commercially using the road for gain. They're using the public road for commercial purposes. In Scotland, we do have that because it's section 97 of the Road Scotland. I can't remember what it is in England, but you can actually license them as street trading. And that means that the companies have to have a record of the riders, and the companies have to ensure that the vehicles used are legal and insured. And the liability track. It cost Domino's Pizza about $80 million in 1993 because one of their drivers seriously injured another driver. And although they tried to back away from it because he was a gig worker, the courts hammered them and said they were liable because they were the principal in command of the operation. And I think that's how we tackle some of this riding. And the other little detail, for Birmingham is to do what we've been doing in Glasgow for 18 years and have a free to ride pedicab service around the pedestrian areas for people who are too tired to walk. And the pedicab riders become mobile visitor information because they can hand out information on where people can go and they can take people there. And it's sponsored by the businesses in the city paying for the advertising and the riders on the pedicabs. So it's self-funding and it helps people get around.
Thanks, H. I was just going to say we've had quite a lot of discussions about this in the last few weeks, and we will continue to look for speakers to talk about this because we know that this is something that's a lot of cities are kind of tackling, and really like the people who are on these bikes and delivering this food are people who are at the most risk actually, because they're also having to ride a lot often in kind of fast traffic as well. So I've got two more, Becky and then Ruth. Can I get you to put yours in the chat because we really need to move on to speakers after that. Thanks, Ruth.
Well, it was very, very, very quick. The APPG for cycling and walking are just commissioning a whole report and research on this very issue. So they are on it at government level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Becky, you had something?
Yes, just briefly, Sussex Safer Roads Partnership. It's a sort of collaboration between Sussex Police and various councils. And our Police and Crime Commissioner has pulled Sussex Police out of the collaboration, saying, and I mean, previously she's indicated that they're sort of busy in inverted commas without showing much in the way of an outcome. And I would say over the summer, if anyone was following their feed, I mean, they do things like speed cameras and pulling up drivers, who are, driving dangerously, etc., disqualified and so on. But their feed on Twitter, they cannot tell the difference between dangerous and careless driving. they've got a big headline. I've retweeted it and said about it, that they're talking about careless driving in terms of driving under the influence and overtaking dangerously. And quite clearly that is dangerous driving. So that's very bad from SSRP. So I'll be waiting to see how road safety or road danger reduction can be improved now in Sussex. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you for everybody for all that news, everybody who's contributed. We're going to move on now to the speaker section of tonight's event, and I'm really pleased to have Zsolt Schuller here, who I think we were just chatting earlier. I think I probably first met maybe even 10 years ago now, which is a long time. So it's great to see him in his, I think, relatively new role, Zsolt, at the National Trust as Cyclists Welcome Manager. And he's going to talk to us about enhancing cycling infrastructure and connectivity to trust properties. So I'll hand over to you, Zsolt. Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Sally. And yes, it probably was about 10 years ago. Somebody introduced me a few weeks ago as a veteran transport planner, and I still like to think of myself as an angry 21-year-old transport planner, but I'll try just sharing my screen. So here we go. Right, here we go. Is that first slide sharing?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Zsolt Schuller. I'm the Cyclist Welcome Lead for the National Trust. I joined the Trust last July, after having worked in local government and as a freelance sustainable and active travel planner for the last 23 years, sort of working with councils and for councils, doing things like LC whips, behaviour change campaigns, as well as I was the manager for Exeter's cycling demonstration town back in the early noughties. So I've got some battle scars and experience in this field. I joined the Trust in July, and I guess one of the first questions I wanted to understand before joining the Trust is, what is the Trust? And sort of it's quite interesting looking into the history of the Trust. Back in 1895, and the founding members of the Trust were seeming to tackle many of the same challenges that we're still dealing with today. So Octavia Hill, a social reformer working on improving housing and protecting access to green spaces. Hardwick Rawnsley, protecting the landscape from development, particularly in the Lake District. And then Robert Hunter, who was a solicitor defending common land from enclosure and development. So it's quite inspiring reading about them and understanding the Trust's place as Europe's biggest conservation charity, and the role to look after nature, beauty and history for everyone to enjoy. Lots of people perhaps perceive the Trust as about stately homes, but actually we look after over 780 miles of coastline and 250,000 hectares of land, much of it free to access and accessible to local communities. My role at the Trust came about because the guy in the top left hand of this slide, this is Hugh Davis. He's the head of data at the National Trust. And in 2022, he took a sabbatical and cycled to 624 National Trust properties. And because he's the head of data, he didn't just go on holiday. He took a field data capture app on his phone and did a bit of a mystery shopper of each of the places he went to visit. And after coming back, he put a report in to explain his experiences. So over half the time on visiting properties, he couldn't find the cycle parking. When he looked on our information pages, he said the information was absent, mostly in relation to cycling or not really usable. Signage on our properties wasn't great. Interactions with staff were really good, so they were friendly but not necessarily always knowledgeable. And he felt there was a big opportunity around our cafes, particularly where they sit outside of the pay barrier at visitor properties. So he put a report together that made the case for my role. On starting, I guess I looked at it from took it to try and take a step back. You know, why is cycling important to the National Trust? The first thing with two of our priorities are taking action on climate change and everyone welcome. Was really kind of making sure that everyone was aware that transport's the biggest single emitting sector of carbon in the UK, but also that a leisure journey is the most common purpose for a car trip, or at least in England it is. So, you know, this is a place we need to be in from that perspective, but also from the everyone welcome side of us. We do a lot of good work to try and improve the diversity of our visitors, working outside of the boundary, you know, of the land that we look after, but actually highlighting the fact that very often the communities we're trying to work with will be the same communities that are living in areas of low or no car ownership. So, you know, 23% of households in England and Wales and nearly 20% in Northern Ireland don't own cars, and that goes up to 50-60% if you go into urban areas. On starting, my original job was about delivering, I guess, what you'd call brilliant basics. So sorting out information and cycle parking at our properties. But all of you will know, you know, the biggest barriers to people choosing to cycle are lack of safe infrastructure. So be that, you know, not wanting to mix with fast moving or high volumes of traffic. So on starting in November 2023, we had our AGM, and there was a resolution put forward by a member asking us to look beyond our boundaries at creating safe connections to our places. That was kind of music to my ears, coming from a broader active travel world. And the news with this AGM, I think it was picked up by Carlton Reid and through Forbes, that then went on social media. And as a result, Chris Boardman got in touch with Andy Beer, who's one of our directors. And Chris is both the chair of Sport England, who we get some funding from, and Active Travel England. And Xavier Bryce got in touch with Hilary, who's our sort of chief. So it was quite good to start my new post with this. We need to do more outreach beyond our boundaries. The other part of where I see an important part of my role is recognising leisure cycling as a potential first step back into everyday cycling. So I've been talking with local authorities about making sure when they're doing things like updating their LTPs that they do understand the importance of leisure travel, but also recognising, you know, some of the LC WIP guidance and a lot of the funding historically has been very much focused on utility trips to schools and to workplaces. But actually getting somebody to go from a non-cyclist to cycling to work, there's a step in the middle with that, which I believe is potentially a positive leisure cycling experience, and goes back to some work we did when I was working at Devon County Council with Cycling England. They had a project called Finding New Solutions, which was looking at what are the routes back into everyday cycling. And we did some work along with the Peak District and the Forestry Commission that actually showed that there was a link between a positive leisure cycling experience and everyday cycling. So we feel we've got a role in this advocacy space. My project is effectively broken down into three main themes: getting to, the arriving at, and now you're here. Getting to, the easy bit is, I guess, sorting out our pre-visit digital information, making that better and more consistent across our places. The longer term stuff is working beyond our boundaries with local authorities, Sustrans, Cycling UK, Active Travel England, and others to start looking at how we can create better walking and cycling connectivity to our places. Arriving at tends to be on property. So this might be improving cycle parking facilities, making sure that they're closer to the entrance than the car parking, making sure that you can easily interpret what they are and you know that they're cycle parking. Things like electric bike charging, if we can put that in as well. And then other stuff like, will our cafes fill your water bottle up for free? Is there somewhere you can leave some luggage? And just offering a general warmer welcome at a human level. The other part, now you're here, at about a dozen of our places, we've actually got off-road trails and cycle hire. So there's some really good examples. Osterley, for example, in London, where the guy who runs the cycle hire there is also a national standard instructor, and he runs his national standard sessions from Osterley Park, training fire service operatives, police from Osterley. So he's kind of blurred the boundaries between his roles. And he works with Cycle Sisters, which is a Muslim cycle group. So there's a really good opportunity of how we're using some of the trails on our places to help with that learning or returning to cycling piece. Part of my role is also about building the evidence base within the trust. Sally, I think you said about the kind of rural aspect of the trust. Actually, quite a lot of our places are on that kind of peri-urban area. So doing some GIS work, we found out around 20 million people live within 5 miles of a National Trust visitor property, which is, half an hour leisure cycle ride. This slide is, I hope you can see it, is from Saltram Park, which is just outside Plymouth. Shows 160,000 people live within 5 miles of the property. Household car ownership within that 5 miles is 24% of households don't own cars, and it's right next to NCN 27 and NCN 2. So that's Devon coast to coast and the South Coast route, which I think Mark Strong was mentioning earlier. So great opportunities for more people to be able to visit by bike or on foot. As well as that, I've looked at the visitor property. I'm sorry, the holiday properties. There's around 500 holiday properties that the trust looks after, and just using as the National Cycle Network as a proxy, recognizing it's only a small proportion of the total cycle network, but over 180 of those properties are less than a mile from the NCN. So there's a really good opportunity to start looking at how we can start perhaps promoting to more active guests. What I'm doing on a day-to-day basis with properties within the trust. So I've set up an internal web page, and on that, just some simple, I guess you'd call them travel planning tools effectively. The first one is a property audit tool. It takes a property between 30 minutes and an hour to fill in. And after that, they answer various questions on, do you have cycle parking? Is it closer to the entrance than the car parking? Do you have cycle parking that's fit for non-standard cycles? Have you updated your getting here guidance? These kind of questions. There's plenty of audit tools out there. I've worked on a few for years and years. And as a result of that, they get feedback, which gives them an action plan to work through, and a bronze, silver or gold accreditation, and something that they can then work through over the next 12 months. As I said, a lot of this is about getting the basics right. So our information, here's some examples from a property. So by bicycle, it simply says NCN 27. And if you click on the by bicycle more information, it takes you to a non-existent or non-functioning Sustrans page. So I've written some guidance on improving that information. The next one to tackle is the hierarchy of the information. So putting the most sustainable mode first, so again, travel planning lesson 101, put the mode you want people to use and the information you want people to see first. We're also working with Active Travel England. So many of our properties, we have to be realistic. We're not likely to get off-road routes to get there, but there's great opportunities to work with local authorities on things like quiet lanes, improved signage. So Killerton House, which is a property near me in Exeter, just commissioned some work to work with consultants looking at the opportunities for quiet lanes. So working alongside the local authority, and just hosted a visit by Active Travel England to look at what we're up to. On property, here's just some examples of better cycle parking, event style cycle parking near our cafes, better signage, and looking at things like e-bike charging. That's an example from North York Moors National Park. We tend to actually just put an outdoor electric plug in place with some signage. What else? There's a big urban theme within the trust. So working with beyond our boundaries. So I've been trying to help with that. This is an example of one of the green corridors on the left, where we're working alongside the boroughs of Croydon, Sutton, Wandsworth and Merton. And I guess I look at it from the perspective of when we're doing the green corridor, what role it can play in everyday active travel. And I've been providing some data using Sport England's levels of everyday physical activity to try and help make the case for what these green corridors can do. The first of the green corridors that's been launched is working in Bath on the Bath-Hampton Meadows. So there's some quite exciting projects coming up in relation to us working outside of boundaries. You've probably all seen the Nature Cities projects. So really sort of challenging ourselves to not just be this on-property organisation. I didn't say at the beginning that my first year of my role was actually funded by Rally Bicycles. And one of the things we've done on property, which is very kind of them, one of the things we've been doing is also on property, trying to see what journeys we could be replacing, you know, rather than using diesel vans, they're replacing vehicle fleets with electric vehicles, but also there's a role for cargo bikes and staff to just be using standard bikes or e-bikes. You know, it makes staff much more visible, and there's an opportunity to then have a conversation about how cargo bikes can be used to move things around on site. A big part of my role is this outreach, so working outside of our boundaries. You know, we don't often have a great deal of budget for some of our improvements, so working with local authorities who might have small budgets for things like cycle parking. We've been working with local authorities to try and get them to ensure that leisure is mentioned as an important component of travel in their updated LTPs, which Devon have just included. But there's a broad range of partners, be they national parks, where we need to learn together about the importance of, you know, decarbonising the leisure journey. You know, Forestry Commission have the same challenges as us, and lots of other partners to work with. There we go. Thank you. I hope that covers everything. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm sorry if that was a bit of a monologue run through, but I hope some of it was of interest.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you. And really lots of really exciting stuff. I think there are lots of questions in the chat. Anybody who wants to add them, keep going. We'll work our way through them. But before we move on to those, I just want to know, how is it just you? Are them, you know, do you have, because that's like, this sounds like a huge task. And in terms of things like audits, and presumably properties can carry out their own, but how will you kind of oversee, sort of get that national picture of what's happening?
So far, we've been at the kind of test and learn phase of the project. So we've had 35 properties do their audits and just testing that the tool works for them. I'm aware that I work in this kind of whole trust team, so a bit detached from those who work operationally on the ground. And so, you know, they're bombarded with tools, and those kind of tools have to work for them. We're currently looking at the idea of having a sort of sustainable travel volunteer on property. So almost scaling up from some work I did, you know, more than a decade ago, to set up bicycle user groups in businesses. So looking at that model, so almost at property, you'd have a champion, and they might be a member of staff or they might be a volunteer. But I'm in an outdoor experiences team. I have a manager who does more of the work with on-property trails, and across the trust there's a greening visitor travel task group, but there isn't really, I guess, a broader transport planning function at the moment. So I do get a few off-topic queries about transport planning and modelling. That I'm a social scientist, so I can't do the modelling, but I try and help.
And I was going to move to the questions in the chat. So Cameron Murray asks, are you also engaging directly with local transport authorities in your areas to ensure they have safe cycle routes in their plans? And I think you touched on that, but perhaps you could say a little bit more about that.
Yes, I mean, I think just this morning I was looking at local authorities' local transport plan update, and as I mentioned, you know, they're incorporated leisure travel. At a property level, we engage with councils on LC whips, so really making sure that they're connecting to our places. You know, we're generating millions of trips every year, and many of those places. So it's just making sure that, we are, but not necessarily consistently at the moment. So I think that's part of this scaling up, is how do we make sure that when the new LC whip guidance comes out, it kind of ensures that local authorities should be engaging with organisations that are big, you know, visitor destinations effectively.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I have another question. Is there going to be work on making sure that bike racks are D-lock friendly? Yes, I guess that's a sort of general question about the bike parking. What, you know, will you have a kind of standard for bike parking that you'll?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we got is a lot of places like to put wooden cycle parking in. So finding a design that is actually, and I know Mark Strong will be going, talk to me. I could see it, but you know, one of the last pieces of work I did when I was working in local government was write some cycle parking guidance. So we need to update the National Trust's guidance, and as you say, have one that actually means a U-lock can fit through. I know the ones that somebody's talking about, you've got these wooden posts that just aren't really very useful. So updating the guidance is part of the plan as well.
Thanks. And somebody's asked, what is being done to reduce induced demand for private car transport from car parking included in the tickets and other car-centric developments? I've seen, for instance, the plan for car park expansion at Lime Park was dropped. And I know actually National Trust properties near me are building car parks. So yeah, have there been conversations around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I have to look. You know, it's beyond my role at the moment. And what I would say is, where properties are making those proposals, is we need to pressure test them to see that they've done absolutely everything they can first to promote active and sustainable travel. And then is there still a case for any other change? You know, I think that's my position probably, and trying to work with others in the trust to make sure that they're not jumping straight to we need a bigger car park, but there's a bigger systemic conversation that we need to have internally about that.
Yeah. Somebody's asked about Bromptons. Is there scope to have safe storage for Bromptons at properties?
I think there's scope for all of these things. I think it's about, I guess, prioritization. You know, first and foremost, getting decent Sheffield stands, or whatever stands we choose. I'm a preference of just Sheffield stands, to be honest. But you know, we need lockers at our places. That's in my audit tool. It didn't say about Bromptons, but I think part of that is just our staff being flexible. So if somebody did come with a Brompton and want somewhere to leave it somewhere, are we just going to go, yes, please, that's fine, you know?
Yeah. Somebody's asked, given LTN 120 is quite a broad document that's not sensitive to heritage, is the National Trust developing its own design guidelines in partnership with Wheels for Wellbeing, for example, possibly in partnership with the Canal and River Trust? I mean, I can imagine really there's a lot of links there, aren't there, with other sort of groups who are working on some of the same issues. And I think you touched on that a little bit, but
yeah. So we got 3 or 4 multi-use trails being built, and I don't think it's with Wheels for Wellbeing we've been working with, but we've been working with another sort of access charity about trail standards. I think, you know, things like barrier removal, somebody talked about that earlier. That's obviously, you know, had a conversation with Dartmoor National Park about this, about kind of free access. So I think there is a piece of work that has been done around, I think it's create and maintain, you know, what are the surface standards we use, and are they with the user focus first, rather than a kind of how's it going to fit in with the landscape. It's making sure that who do we need to use it, so then what are the types that we could put in, and now how do we design it so it looks sympathetic. I think it's sometimes been done the other way up, be that by local highway, rights of way teams or others. It's kind of, is the user at the heart of the decision making.
Somebody's asked about the kind of design of the approach to properties, so that you can have direct, clear routes from the gate to the cycle parking. I guess not going through car parks.
Yeah, I mean, that's finding the examples of best practice to share with other properties. At the moment, a lot of our access is driven through, is managed through that one central access. And that resolution that I mentioned from last year was all about providing alternatives, so you don't have to mix with traffic. If you get off a bus, is there a dedicated walking route in? Different properties have different approaches to it, but part of my role is to create a bank of best practice to say, well, it works here, could we do it elsewhere? Similar to local authorities sharing with each other, really.
Yeah. And this is a good one from Susie Morrow. I noticed in the Autumn National Trust magazine 2 examples of car centricity. Knightshays was described as half an hour north of Killerton, while Belton was described as 20 minutes north of Woolsthorpe Manor. These places are 9 miles and 10 miles apart, respectively. So my question is whether there's any training of National Trust magazine writers, editors, in order to challenge the underlying assumptions that everyone drives to National Trust properties.
So language and imagery, in terms of my slides that I share internally, are really important aspects of this. And exactly as you said, this car centricity is a cultural change that part of my time I can spend trying to do. So it's a work in progress, but any examples like that, I'd love if you could send them across to me, just so I can kind of bank them and share them and say, did we need to say it quite like this, or could we have said it in a bit more of a sustainable, you can arrive here by a cross-section of modes.
Yeah, thanks. Somebody says, great presentation, really positive to hear National Trust being more proactive. My local site is Dunham Massey currently doesn't allow cycling within the site unless you're 5 years old. Is there anything that we can do to help with progress?
I think Dunham Massey's actually just done the audit tool, and I've been speaking to somebody in Manchester, the Greater Manchester team, about Dunham. So there might be locations where sharing or cycling beyond a certain location might be a challenge, given that quite a lot of the audience at National Trust places might be older. There's a sort of cultural bit I've got to do working with some of the volunteers as well. But I think on a case-by-case basis, got to sort of deconstruct some of that stuff to understand, is there a rational reason why you can't go beyond where you could? But I don't know Dunham in detail, I'm afraid, sorry.
Thank you. And Martin Gibson asks, do you feed into LC Whip consultations where you have significant properties in the area?
So I'm trying not to do that because I've got to cover England, Wales and Northern Ireland. But what I'm trying to do is make sure that the regional teams and the property teams do. So just to make sure that they're all aware. And, really good example, again, down in Devon, where the team have input into, I think, 3 of the LC whips. And it's been quite useful just to see the local authority starting to understand quite how many journeys that trust property generates, and think of it as a trip generator rather than just somewhere people go for leisure. So one of the things I've been doing with the mapping team is just making sure we can really easily, at a local authority level, say this is how many properties there might be in Hertfordshire and how many trips they generate. This is how many properties elsewhere, so that we can start having a really informed decision when we try to join in with LC whips.
Great. And then there's 3 kind of, I guess, about sort of access. One person wants to know, sometimes properties are really, really big, but they might only have one access point for vehicles. Understandably, is there scope to add other access points for, and often there are other points, I guess, for walking, but perhaps not for cycling. And then there's a couple of questions generally around kind of membership and costs. Somebody says that they often just go past National Trust properties, but cafes, if they're in a group cycling, because not everyone's a member. Is there a kind of scope for people to use the cafe if they're cycling as a group? And somebody else asks, is there could you give have money off access for people who ride by public transport? I don't know if that happens already.
So I can remember the second two. Could you just remind me the first bit of that?
This one was just about accessing.
Oh, access. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're doing a data piece of work at the moment about where access points are around our boundaries for all of our sites. The next bit is to try and compare that to the National Street Gazetteer layer for where walking and cycling. So where it makes sense, is there a bus stop that you currently have to walk 500 meters down the road and then so are there some locations which would be really good quick wins for this kind of thing? We then have to look at the kind of property model, is it an open access, or is there a risk of, if it's a place that's a commercially run place, does that create an alternative access? So there's some challenge there, but we're doing the desk-based exercise first. Cafes, I think of the 280 cafes, there's around 120 of them that are actually outside of our pay barrier. So we've had a really good conversation with Cycling UK. They're relaunching their Cyclists Welcome website, which I think it's visited by 100,000 users a year, and to really amplify that a lot of our cafes are outside of the pay barrier. So, we could be actually seen as a destination for leisure cycling. And linked to that, we're starting to do a historical piece of work, hopefully, a little group of us to look into the history of cycling and the National Trust. There's actually a 1902, one of the guys found a letter from 1902 between the CTC and the National Trust asking for us to work closely together. So it's the kind of, over 100 years of perhaps having a conversation about this. And what was the last bit? My note, sorry, Sally. What was the last?
I think it was just discounts for National Trust.
Oh, yes. So it's not a universal thing, because some of our properties would obviously, if you're in the centre of London or at Castlefield Viaduct in Manchester, where it's, everybody would already be arriving on foot or by bike. But we're working with Good Journey, which is a car-free tourism organisation. And so in each region, there's around 12 to 15 properties who are doing that kind of offering incentives. I've been obviously trying to talk to them about, it's about enable, then encourage and incentivize. But obviously the world is a bit messier than that. So sometimes you have to do what you can with the resources you've got. But quite a few places are offering, free coffee if you arrive by bike or show your bus ticket.
That sounds great. And more of that. Sarah, you have a hand up. Do you want to ask your question? Then I'll return to the ones in the chat. You there? No, Sarah?
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, it was a mistake. That's
Yeah,
fine.
If there's any time at the end, I would like to say something. I'm now awake. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'll bring you in at the end.
Thank you.
So there's a question around, are you being consulted as Active Travel England work on their rural route guidance?
Yes, so we're a stakeholder in that. I've badgered them consistently to make sure that we are, and that's where I was talking about quiet lanes earlier and opportunities around that. We've got lots of properties close to urban areas, some of them separated by quite busy roads, so that's some of the challenge in terms of what kind of crossings can we put in that might be appropriate, where we, I know I was working on a crossing recently before starting at the trust, and economically it just didn't stack up. It was going to be £500,000 because you had to put the lighting and all of this kind of stuff in a rural environment, and and it's trying to find out what kind of things might be appropriate, but still be safe.
Yeah. Mark, do you want to ask your question since you've got a hand up?
Thanks. Just say hi to Zsolt, obviously. And you've been doing great stuff. The question was in the chat, but it got lost. It was a long time ago. As opposed to visitor attractions, it's the large countryside properties. You mentioned open access. We've been trying to get a route through Seven Sisters for 25 years, and it's opposed on access routes. And there must be lots of other places like that. The argument is it doesn't bring anything to the property. All it does is bring lots of visitors who on bikes who are a problem, and you have to surface something and so on. So how do you get around? How do you actually manage to do that? Or are you just trying to concentrate on the visitor attractions?
I mean, I think this isn't just about getting, in terms of the trust, we're an access charity. And I think there's plenty of places where people are cycling through National Trust land, not necessarily, and it's land that we care for. So I think it's not just about getting people to our places where there's a case for it, and we should be being challenged about where we can help deliver routes between communities or for other reasons that might not have a direct kind of visitor benefit, but it might be helping communities connect. So I think depending on the case by case basis, but that's something we should be being challenged on. I'm not sure if that answered, Mark, but perhaps we can chat further.
Thanks, Mark. Ruth, you have a hand up.
Thank you. That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you very much. There is, because you mentioned Wandsworth and the Green Way or route or whatever, and I know that isn't specifically National Trust, but there is a real disconnect in this country between putting in proper usable paths that people of all abilities of cycling and wheelchair use and walking can use, where, we tend to prefer non-tarmac or non-whatever, so we end up with muddy and routes and really difficult to use. And so many cycle routes are being put in that are like that. The Ripley Greenway has got a fantastic surface, and I hope people will go and look at it. But it's just that it is a real issue that the so-called environmentalists object to decent surfacing. And I hate to mention Holland, but I will, because they always have surface that can be used 365 days of the year, and wheelchair users can use it. So I just wondered what the NT view on that kind of issue is. Thank you.
I think again, it's a bit. I mean, my take on this is it's probably the longest non-versation I think I've had in my career, is people talking about what's appropriate surfacing. I have my view about putting something in this, as you've said, smooth and appropriate and fit, and then we kind of look at what color does it need to be, how does it fit in. It kind of almost sometimes feels like there's an alpha male who's making the decision on this. This happens in the public realm as well, where you've got cycle routes that are designed to be it's more of a kind of urban public realm scheme, so they don't want to make them stand out too much. So I don't know that there's necessarily a consistent view at the trust at the moment. The create and maintain guidance that we're working on is supposed to help teams do that. Each individual property is the delegated model of delivery. They find their own way, but we try and put guidance down. And I think it is, as I said earlier, who do you want to use this path? If it's everyone, then it needs to be, fit for purpose for everyone, and not just decided, we want to use Hoggin because that doesn't, look bad or whatever it might be. But I'm not a surfacing expert. All I can do is kind of lobby internally, really.
Thanks. I'm just going to bring in Adam. I'm just going to bring in a couple more questions, or one more question from the chat, and then I'll let you ask your question. Somebody has asked about staying in holiday cottages, and that they don't generally have secure cycle storage. Is that something you'll address? And I suppose I'll add to that I've stayed in National Trust campsites and have arrived on bikes. or on foot, and there's very little space given over. If you come with a tent and you're cycling or walking, you get to usually put it on a sort of really scratty bit of grass with not a lot of room, and there aren't a lot of facilities. Whereas if you go to some other countries, you might get a sort of outdoor kitchen, you know, you get other kind of a shelter and various other things. Is that, and I no doubt they vary widely, the trust property campsites, but if you're looking at kind of that aspect, is that sort of something that you're gonna?
I mean, it's definitely not my job. My job has been to highlight the fact that there's a huge opportunity here. So what I did do was look at the different accreditations from across Europe to develop a similar to that, the wheel of approval for visitor properties, but for cottages and for the campsites. So here's a dozen things that you could do really simply and cheaply, and to highlight the opportunity. And so I think that's where I am with it. And I agree, you know, that there's our cottages at the moment, I'd have thought most of them don't have anywhere safe or secure, but it's starting to think, if we're trying to look at who might our future audiences be, how might they want to travel? Do we want them to, you know, even if they drive, do we want them to bring their bikes so they can have a car-free day if they're going out? So it's highlighting the opportunities. I think, you know, they've been doing their kind of business as usual, and it's saying, actually, there's a big market here. You know, when I was at Devon, we commissioned a report. It showed 3 of the trails brought in £15 million a year to the Devon economy. This is about why it makes business sense.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing that. Adam, do you want?
I'm committing the organisation to lots of promises. I'm just the janitor.
I just wanted to, because you mentioned specifically Barthampton Meadows, and I think the way, and I've been on there talking to the people that's there, as well as possibly some other people on here have also spoken, but they're using a really interesting narrative, which is around accessibility and making the paths wheelchair friendly. And it's got all the local dog walkers really angry because they like their field and what they can do with it. But if you make it about cycling, they just stay away from the term cycling. Do you find talking about cycling versus talking about making it wheelchair accessible, which still requires the same infrastructure almost, is it much easier at those kind of conversations you're having because, it's not cyclists anymore, it's about inclusivity and accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, my job title doesn't help. So cyclists welcome, and
I wanted to mention that, but I didn't.
No. And I was just on immediately starting, like day one, I said, can I change my job title? Because actually, I don't like saying cyclist. It's people riding bikes. It's always people driving cars. You know, it's all of this kind of the same stuff. And you know, somebody once said to me, calling somebody a cyclist is as useful as saying I'm a shoe wearer. You know, there's just such a broad church of different people who choose to ride bikes for whatever reason, or cycle, for whatever reason they do. And you're quite right. Actually, cycling is such a Marmite topic that sometimes I come into a meeting and I can tell already it's not helpful. So this is about accessibility. You know, it's walking, wheeling, and cycling. Barthampton Meadows, great example. The route through Barthampton Meadows, when I went and did a site visit there, the bridge that comes out, I was like, oh, that looks like that was probably put in about 10 years ago. Googled it, and it had been funded by local Sustainable Transport Fund money. And so it'd been funded specifically to get people to work, to school. And the people complaining were dog walkers complaining about the path that had been funded by money to, if you see what I mean, they were complaining about the people that had got the funding for the path in the first place, effectively. So I think there's some digging sometimes to go, well, hang on a minute, what is this path for? It's for all sorts. It's for utility, leisure, and we need to work on turning the thermostat down a little bit to say, actually, people can share well if we design things well.
And I think that's a very good note to end on. I hope we've answered everybody's questions. A huge thank you again, though, for coming and sharing all of that. It's really interesting, and we'll all be following it now and sort of having a look at what's happening locally, and I guess people can feed back, can't they, to their local where it's a property.
Yeah, and do challenge them. You know, there's nothing, you know, visitor feedback is really important to places, and I think that's the way to make progress. But also, if people want to get in touch with me, I think my email, if you can share that, or just email cyclists@nationaltrust.org.uk. Would it also be all right to get any of the questions, because I've seen the sort of chat going past? I don't know if there's any way of sharing the chat with me afterwards, just so I can see
we should
some
be able
useful
to
stuff
do
to
that.
pick up.
Yeah, we should be able to do that, and we can certainly share those questions. I think that, yes, I suppose I was also going to add to that. Yeah, if you are a National Trust member, then you might want to feedback that you've heard this talk tonight and that you're really pleased that this work's happening. It's always good to get positive feedback.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I think everybody will want to say thank you very much. And it just remains to say that next week we are really pleased to have Adam Tranter here, former Cycling and Walking Commissioner for the West Midlands Combined Authority. He's going to reflect on his time there, and also in kind of a broader where we are with active travel now. So we look forward to seeing you next week, hopefully. Thank you very much. And goodbye, everybody. Adam, do you want to stop recording?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.